Hi there, it's Marzena. Today's project is very special, cause it's my first ever commission. Made for free. For my niece. But a commission nevertheless. She asked me to make her a cat fairy. So, let's dive in. An obvious choice for the base was one of the Monster High felines, Catty Noir. I just had to get rid of her tail, and she was ready for the preparation process. As always, I started by cutting her hair as short as possible with my sharpest scissors. Then I dunked her head in a freshly boiled water for about 1 minute. It makes it safer to detach the head due to the warm head being more soft and squishy. Hot water also melts the glue inside the head, so it can be easily scraped and extracted. When she was finally properly bald, I removed her face with 100% acetone. With the head nice and clean, it was time to shrink it. The original heads are always way too big for my liking. This head was approximately 3.5 centimeters wide before the shrinking, and after 4 rounds of soaking and drying, its width decreased to 2.7 centimeters. Pretty good. If you're interested in the full head shrinking process, check out my tutorial. To put her head back on her shoulders, I trimmed down the neck peg, slimmed down the neck, widened the neck hole, and heated up the head with my hairdryer. Now for the scary part. I wanted to enhance her feline features a bit more and give her a subtle yet naughty smirk. I also cut off the tips of her ears. I used epoxy sculpt to create the new mouth. Of course, I gave her a pair of tiny canine teeth. She's a little predator after all. I wasn't planning on giving her a muzzle, but it kinda happened at some point. I am still not 100% sure how I feel about her more animalistic face, but it adds to the design, so it stayed. As for the ears, I used the originals as a base, but wanted to give them some more realistic details. Oh, and the tips I snapped cause they were a little bit too pointy and protruding backwards. Retruding? And I didn't want that. When her face and ears were all cured solid, I gave them a good sanding treatment. We don't want any harsh and nasty clay to plastic transitions, especially on the doll's face. I wiped the dust off the doll and the table, and I turned our girl into a cozy burrito. Then I used Hobby Paints Black, Army Painter's Barbarian Flesh, and 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear UV Cut Matte Varnish to prime the face and get it ready for face-up. The Barbarian Flesh turned a little bit rough, as Barbarian should, but that was not a problem. Nothing my pan pastels couldn't handle. This girl was made to order, so I asked my niece what color does she want her cat fairy to be. It was a mistake, cause her answer was this. This is Tycia, my parents' tortoiseshell kitty cat. And the worst choice for a feminine face-up, at least in my opinion. Very pretty cats, but no structure, no symmetry, pure chaos. So I took a creative liberty and made the face more clean and symmetrical, but kept the tortoiseshell/calico cat's color scheme. The whole face was quite an experiment. Because I gave her a muzzle, the face shifted dangerously onto the furry territory. And I am not 100% sure what to think about it. I knew that I don't want the face to be too dark, because it's a main focus point of the doll, and dark vinyl bases are almost impossible to blush, so it could end up looking too flat. With my style and my way of doing face-ups, flat blushing and shading on a face is just unacceptable. But with that, I had to forget about using tortoiseshell cat as a face-up reference and come up with something that's interesting, readable, and at least somehow bringing tortoiseshell cat in mind if you know what you're looking at. I am not sure if I managed to achieve the latter, but oh well. This is one of the main reasons why I will never be open to customers' commissions. I am fueled by inspiration that comes to me very unpredictably. I do struggle a lot when I am rushed into a project I have no clear design idea for. I didn't plan on doing a cat fairy, especially in this color combination. Most of the time I had no idea what I was doing. But I wanted to make it for my niece, because I love her and I wanted to make her happy. And if black and brown cat lady will make her happy, black and brown cat lady she will get. I was quite far into the face-up when I decided that I can't stand it anymore. This nasty epoxy to vinyl transition just didn't want to even out, and it was poking me in the eye and making my brain itch. Instead of sanding it down and starting from scratch, I tried an unorthodox idea, and I smeared a thin layer of UV resin on top of the problematic area, blending the edges as well as possible, and cured it with UV light. I sprayed it with a layer of matte varnish so it would lose the shine. I must say that worked pretty well. I gave my kitty girl a variety of freckles: white, yellow, black, to some extent, imitate the specks of bright color tortoiseshell cats have in their fur. Imitate might be a wrong word here, cause she still differ a lot from her inspo. But I do wanted to incorporate a little bit of this chaos, just a smidge. I also gave her bright eyelashes, being once again inspired by the contrasts in tortoiseshell cat's fur. Bright colors on the face-up need to be built up layer by layer. To be honest with you, I have never counted the amount of MSC layers I do on a singular face. But I would guess I do between 10 and 20. And from what I know, that's a lot. I used heated up pin to poke 3 holes in each temple. Those will be for the future whiskers. I didn't want her to look like she has a mustache like Salvador Dali, so I only painted 6 white dots on her muzzle to indicate the whiskers spots without actual whiskers being placed there. With white acrylic paint, I created tiny catch lights in her eyes. And the face-up was done. Not my favorite face that I've done, but also not the worst, so let's move on to the comparison. Heads with animal ears are always much harder to shrink, but even so the difference was well visible. I covered the new face with plastic wrap to keep it safe, and it was time for some body transformation. First always comes the destruction. I started by cutting out the middle part of her torso. Then I cut off her lower legs. Sounds like a date gone wrong, but stay with me. We're just getting started. The lower legs of Monster High dolls are so freakishly long, I had to cut them into pieces to shorten them. I cut off her head. The date is going better and better. And later I also cut off one of her arms. And sanded down her toes. Smoothed the edges on each piece, got rid of the plastic panties and seam lines, and drilled holes for the wire so I could put my girl back together like a good Sid that I am. So this part looks a bit creepy, but I had to create a spine for her to connect the head with both parts of the torso. At first I made a long one, but it was hard to handle, so I switched it for two shorter ones. At this stage I also glued in the arms, but left the elbow joints mobile. The stomach gap I filled with aluminium foil and hot glue. I also glued the lower legs, but without the feet yet. The bigger gaps I filled with hot glue, and I recently found the wet finger or Q-tip perfect for smoothing the hot glue out.
Krzywo. Yikes! No wiecie co? Miało być okej.
When the gluing was done, it was time for the epoxy sculpt to come in. I sculpted the neck part and shoulders. And the stomach/back. Then I gave her nice, round and juicy buttocks. And I really put my mind to it. I don't know why I focused so much on the chest area, because I gave her a pair of new boobies later anyway. When this first part of epoxy cured, I gave my doll a good sanding treatment. And oh, don't mind my scratched hand. We have a personal devil trapped in a little kitty's body. Kinda going with the theme here, huh? It was time for her boob job. It was intentional to make them kinda unbothered by gravity, because they will be resting on an object in front of her. The boobs ended up a little uneven in the cleavage area, but that was a non-issue in this design. Our kitty cat needed her tail. I drilled a hole in her lower back and cut out a piece of wire, which I bent to my liking. I wrapped a very thin wire around the main one to work as a retention for the clay. and sculpted the base shape of our tail from Super Sculpey. I baked it and then roughed its surface with low-grit sanding sponge. Then I smeared some liquid Sculpey on the tip of the tail. I put small pieces of clay and shaped them with sculpting tools, creating the fur. I worked my way down from the tip to about 1/3 length of the tail. The remaining 2/3 I covered with clay and just added a fur texture on top. Let's give our girl a break and let's give her something to lean on. I made a ball from aluminium foil and put it on a stick. Then I smeared it with liquid Sculpey and covered it with Super Sculpey clay. I was brainstorming what could Cat Fairy be leaning on, and despite a haystack being a strong candidate, I chose a classic ball of yarn. I took my clay extruder with proper tip on, filled it with Sculpey, and pressed the clay out. With that, I had few nice and even strings of clay, or in this case, yarn strings. I placed them on my ball in a pattern I thought resembles a yarn ball. It doesn't look perfect, but I believe it's quite obvious that it is supposed to be a yarn, so good enough. With silicone tools, I gave the string a little more depth. Some gaps I filled with liquid Sculpey for more seamless transition between the string and the base, and I used this metal sculpting tool to create the texture on the surface of my ball. And then I baked it in the oven. And to add more details to the stand later, I also made 3 smaller yarn balls. Let's go back to our girl, or at least to her feet. I glued an attachment wire inside each foot, and I started sculpting her cute little kitty paws from epoxy sculpt. I separated the toes, added some cute toe beans, and I also created the retruded claws. I used my own cats as a reference for both ears and feet, by the way. When the epoxy cured, I could attach the feet and the tail to our girlie and cover the connection with more epoxy. When that part cured, I gave it a little sanding. After all, exfoliation is crucial in your beauty routine. When I felt that the transitions were smooth enough, I sculpted some fur on my doll's chest, forearms, ankles and lower back. And the sculpting on her was pretty much done. So, my niece originally asked for a cat fairy holding a mouse fairy in her mouth. But that concept was a bit too challenging for me, so I decided that the mouse fairy will be just chilling on her hand instead, unaware of our kitty's true intentions. Silly little thing. At first I tried to sculpt our tiny mouse girl from Super Sculpey, but my sculpting skills are unfortunately not there yet. And I didn't want to put some abomination on my niece's figurine. You need to know your limits. So I decided to 3D print some tiny girly and customize her to my needs. After all, it is a customization channel, isn't it? I cut her tiny body into the tiniest pieces, which sounds even more horrible than talking about body modification on a doll. I then glued the pieces in a different position and covered the gaps and connection points with epoxy. The arms were so thin, I decided to try straightening them with just heat. But it didn't work at all.
Oh no. To jest pewien problem.
Gluing such tiny pieces is always problematic, cause the bigger the glued surface, the better. But somehow I managed to put this girl together. And here she is with her mousy ears and chest hair. And the pose comparison. The original here is a little smaller, but it doesn't matter. I drilled holes for the tail and wings and sanded down the epoxy to resin transitions. The tail I made from a piece of wire that I bent to my liking and thinned down the tip. And here's our mouse fairy fully sculpted. One last part of the sculpting phase was the stand. I took 2 wooden bricks and put them together using 3 wooden pegs. Firstly, I drilled 3 holes in just one brick. Inserted the pegs inside them. Put a tiny dot of paint on top and pressed it against the second brick. In the spots where the paint transferred, I drilled the second hole triplets. Good enough. I glued both pieces together with wood glue and bonded them with tape. I left it for the night, and when the glue dried, I removed the tape and cut out an oval piece out of my big brick. I spread some liquid Fimo on top, cause I was running out of liquid Sculpey, and I used Super Sculpey to sculpt the floor. Literally, because from all kinds of surfaces that our cat fairy could be placed on, I decided on wooden floor, like in a barn, or a patio, or some cozy house. When the whole stand was covered with clay, I sculpted the individual floorboards and added some wooden texture on top. I wanted them to look organic, cottagecore, and old. I smoothed the clay with alcohol, marked the doll's placement, and added some cracks. And it was ready for baking. We had almost all the pieces ready, but the yarn balls looked too neat. So from cosplay I created few loose strings and placed them around the yarn balls. Cosplay is quite flexible after baking, so it's less likely to break. It's still fragile, but not as much as Super Sculpey. And with that, the sculpting phase was done and I could start blushing and painting. Since we are already focused on the stand, let's paint it first. Simple task. Just black base and brown dry brushing and dark brown wash on top. I also glued a piece of EVA foam to the bottom so the wood won't scratch any shelf. Let's tackle my balls now. The process looked the same as with the stand. Base color, lighter dry brushing and darker wash. I glued my balls in place along with the loose strings. I used both super glue and Mod Podge to bond everything together. To emphasize our little kitty's nasty nature, I 3D printed and painted with brown wash a bunch of human and bird skulls and a variety of bones. At scale, of course. I placed them here and there on the stand. I used Mod Podge to glue them, cause it cures transparent, while super glue likes to cure with white residue on its surface. It looked quite okay, but to give it a little more oomph, I added pastel shading on the bottom parts of the balls and some shadows that they would cast on the floor. And the stand was done and ready for our girl. So let's serve her next. Same as with her face, I started with the base colors, black and barbarian flesh, and 3 layers of MSC, of course. When the last layer of varnish cured, I started the body blushing, and I built it layer by layer until I've got a similar result to the blushing on the face. The furry parts I finished with bright pencils and black pastel. Then I drew tons of freckles. I continued until I was satisfied. I could finally remove the protective wrap from my doll's head and fix the neck area that I couldn't reach earlier. I painted her nails and claws with creamy acrylic, cause cat's claws are rather whitish, and I added a little brown shading to them so they look less flat and clean. And I totally forgot about the holes for the wings. All my fairies had to have wings, even cat fairies. No exceptions. With all the blushing and shading done, it was time for my least favorite part, the hair. For this project, I decided to try a type of yarn recommended by Emilia from Doll's Afterlife. This yarn is great pick if you're aiming for a short haircut. No need for reroot and no visible wefts. I just cut the yarn piece by piece and glued those to my doll's scalp. I normally choose a hot glue for the wefts cause it sets super fast, but here I used Mod Podge glue cause the pieces were harder to grab and I didn't want to burn my fingers. I tried to create the chaotic pattern, but instead of tortoiseshell, I achieved something more like a calico cat look. Oh well. I trimmed down the yarn and after that fixed it with a hairspray. It ended up definitely not as good as on Emilia's cat doll project, but I swear, hair always hated me, so I am still satisfied with this result. Because this design was very bottom heavy, I decided to give our girlie a nice bow tied on the neck. I cut out the pieces from Warbler thermoplastic, heated them up and put them together, creating a bow. It consisted of two parts, an actual bow and a ribbon that wraps around the neck. I primed the pieces with red and shaded them with black pan pastel. I fixed the shading under a layer of varnish. To the wings! I placed two sets of wire on a plastic ruler, a bigger set for our cat fairy and a tiny one for our little mousy. I covered them with UV resin and cured under an UV lamp. I removed them from the ruler and gave them a proper shape with a milling cutter on a micromotor. I wiped off the dust and painted the pattern with black marker and acrylic paint. Then I airbrushed the colors. Transparent yellow, transparent orange, and black. Fixed everything under a layer of UV resin and cured it. Because sometimes UV resin ends up nice after curing and sometimes it comes out quite sticky, I cured each side once again, but this time from under the water. It always works like a charm. With this element done, we had the bow, the wings, and 6 whiskers made from my cats. Mostly one. Don't worry, I didn't pluck or cut them. I just dived into his favorite sleeping spots, like my sock drawer. And our cat fairy was complete. I also glossed her lips, nose, claws, and toe beans. And I also glued patches of brown fur to her cute little paws. But we still have one Mini to paint. The Minnie Mouse, to be exact. At first I wanted to make her grey, but decided that brown will be more coherent with the rest of the project. And there already is a brown mouse fairy in my world, so maybe it's the same one? Or maybe they are related? I did majority of the job with pastels, but I also used brown acrylic paint on her hair and fur and pigments lifted up from pencils for her tiny eyes and mouth. I also used creamy pencil to give her more crisp highlights. I am not a skilled miniature painter, but it ended up not too bad, I guess. When the little one was ready, I gave her her tiny wings. Pretty cute. Then I could finally give my kitty cat her snack. For this, I once again used Mod Podge because, again, it always cures transparent. Last thing to do was to put our kitty on her stand. And another fairy project was finally done. As I stated previously, I wasn't planning on making a cat fairy, so this design was a mixture of improvisation and last-minute ideas. It was as chaotic as a pattern on tortoiseshell cat fur. But I wanted to give my niece a pretty figurine, and with her love towards cats, I couldn't expect her to choose any other concept. Overall, I am happy that I made it. I struggle when commissioned, but I adore making gifts for my loved ones. Despite the fact that our kitty ended up more calico, I know that I did my best. I like her pose and her paws. I really like her stand. I promise that in the future I will learn how to sculpt a tiny figurine from scratch. I hope that my niece won't be disappointed that our kitty is not eating the mouse fairy yet. But I think it's pretty clear how the story continues. And of course, I hope that you like this sneaky little kitty too. Or at least enjoyed the process. Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. YouTube loves engagement, but who am I to judge? I love reading your comments too. If you want to see sneak peeks and updates, you can follow me on Instagram or X. And if you want to support me even more, you can buy me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. That was a long video, so thank you guys for watching and see you soon! Excuse me? Ow, 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 ow. Dzikus.